There we go. Good morning, everyone. This is Wanda DeVargas, Chair of the APWA Colorado Chapter Construction Inspection Conference. It's my pleasure to moderate today's presentation with our partners at the Colorado Asphalt Pavement Association via the Rocky Mountain Asphalt Education Center. And thank you to the attendees, for your time today to help us keep the momentum going with the virtual construction inspection conference. As true public works professionals, we like to think of our inspectors and conference attendees with the quote by Greg Kincaid. He says, "No matter how much falls on us, we keep plowing ahead, and that's the only way to keep the roads clear." You know, conference planning hasn't been like we expected, but we found a way to stay connected with you. We're pleased to host 3 sessions for you this year with no interruptions from COVID-19 impacts. And before we begin with session 2, I'd like to mention that we will be recording our session today, and we will post this session along with the other sessions to the APWA Colorado chapter website. You can enter questions in the chat box on your screen, and questions may be answered live. However, because our session is recorded today, for our future viewers, we're going to hold the questions until the end of the session, and we will answer them if time allows. We'd also like to thank our sponsors for support of our conference, and this includes the American Concrete Pavement Association, Colorado-Wyoming Chapter, Colorado Barricade, our friends at the Colorado Ready Mix Concrete Association, and Cutlery Paving. In the spirit of the Construction Inspection Conference and not being able to see you in person, we want to provide a sense of normalcy with the conference, and as such, the sponsors have donated gift cards as part of a virtual door prize. At the end of today's session, the APWA Colorado Chapter Administrator, Pamela Weimer, she's going to draw 2 names randomly from the attendees that are online. We're going to announce the winners, and Pamela will send an email to the winners with the sponsor's contact information. And the winner will inform the sponsor on whether they want an electronic or a hard copy of the gift card. And our 2, actually we have three gift cards today. We have 2 from Colorado Barricade and 1 from Cutlery Paving. And before we get started, I'd also like to introduce Paul Rude, the APWA Colorado Chapter President-elect. Paul works with the town of Telluride, and an interesting fact about Paul is that he spent 1 summer working for and living in the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. So if you ever have an opportunity to meet with Paul, I'm sure he has some interesting stories to tell you about his time at the Stanley. And Paul would like to share a few words to the conference attendees.
Thank you, Wanda. Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you to session 2 of the annual Construction Inspection Conference on behalf of Colorado APWA Chapter President Mike Martin, the rest of the Colorado Chapter Board, and all of our Colorado Chapter members. I'm not certain if you're aware, but the Colorado Chapter of APWA is held in high regard nationally, and this conference is one of the reasons why. Thank you for your participation. I know that the balanced mixture design presentation will be awesome. There have been some great advancements in asphalt over the last decade or so. I hope everybody has a good day. And at this time, I'll turn it back to Wanda.
Thank you, Paul. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today's session, which include Tom Clayton, who's the Director of Training and Membership for the Colorado Asphalt Pavement Association, also known as CAPA. And Tom has nearly 45 years of experience in asphalt construction and materials testing. Along with Tom, we have Mike Skinner, who is CAPA's Director of Engineering, and he provides technical support for local agencies across the state. Tom and Mike have worked together for 30 years, and they bring a unique set of knowledge and experiences to CAPA. They share them and promote quality and best practices of the asphalt paving industry. And CAPA continues to be a long-term partner of APWA Colorado, and we welcome the value that CAPA brings to us. Tom and Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Wanda. Tom and I have pre-recorded our session so we could streamline what we'll share with you. So we'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the session. Hi, I'm Mike Skinner, Director of Engineering for the Colorado Asphalt Pavement Association. With me today is my partner, Tom Clayton, Director of Training and Membership. One of the things we'd like to talk about today is innovation in roadway materials and technologies. It sometimes can be very slow and difficult. Why is that? Because most agencies just don't like change. Change is a hard thing for all of us to do. And when we look at our local agency partners across the state and the challenges that they have, a lot of times they'll reflect on CDOT or defer back to CDOT and what CDOT is doing, how they do their processes. Tom, talk to me a little bit about the differences between local agency paving and CDOT paving and why one shouldn't rely on specifications, methodology, or procedures from the other. Why is that so important?
Well, Mike, let's talk a little bit. Let's go back a little bit before we get to that. Let's talk about the kind of the history of what's going on. That these local agencies obviously came around and started popping up after CDOT started building specs, and CDOT's got a full gambit of people that can put specifications together. And it's been easy for local agencies to just go, well, why do we need to reinvent the wheel? We have CDOT out there doing all of this research, and CDOT's got, labs and researchers, and they're gaining data from everywhere to put together specifications. So then the local agencies, the cities and the counties, the towns, have said, well, we'll just take CDOT spec and we'll apply them back to what we're doing. The problem with that is that it's fraught. What local agencies are doing is nothing like what CDOT is doing. The local agencies are out there building, low volume roads, and I'm talking about comparatively low volume roads. CDOT roads, even on their what CDOT considers a low volume road, would be maybe in a lot of cases an arterial or a collector in a local agency aspect. But CDOT has nothing that compares to what the low volume roads are for these agencies, the cities, the subdivisions, the cul-de-sacs, those kind of roads in and out of the subdivisions. So having the CDOT spec and building to the CDOT spec is truly overbuilding what you're trying to do. And that's why we've seen a lot of the problems that we're seeing at the local agency level with their roads being overbuilt.
The phone calls that we get at CAPA from our local agency friends across the state, I hear you ask them all the time. When you're on the phone with one of them, you'll ask them, how many highways does your local agency build, and how do you respond to that?
None.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, you ask the opposite question: how many local roads does CDOT build?
The same answer. None.
None. So that's a great way to look at it. Is then why are we trying to implement the same specification and methodology for while it's asphalt paving? They're two very different worlds.
Yeah, they're asphalt paving materials are asphalt paving materials. Are the local agencies, the cities, the counties, and the towns using the same materials that CDOT uses? Broad scope, yes, they are. They're using an S or an SX grading mix with sometimes similar binders. However, the gyration levels are where we really need to be thinking about. And once you start putting the mix design together at lower gyration levels, even though we're using the same rock, the same binder, basic things, but once you start putting those things together, we got a totally different ball game that we're going into. We're not playing in the major leagues here. We're down to the little league level.
Now, when we talk about quality, quality is at the top of everybody's radar. All of our local agencies, CDOT, the commercial market, etc. That's number one for what everybody we're doing. That's what we're paying for. That's what we're building, and that's our minimum level of expectation. In fact, we recognize that through our Best in Colorado Asphalt Pavement Awards, and the members that compete and in that program are very proud of the work that they do across the state. But high level, big picture, in the world of real estate, they'll always tell you, when you're shopping for a piece of location, a piece of real estate, it's location, location, location. And so we can apply that same thing to quality, big picture when we're talking about asphalt pavements. It's compaction, compaction, compaction. While there are a lot of technical things that we're involved with, the binders and the voids, etc. The big picture is compaction. And Tom, when you're out in the field on visiting projects, whether they be agency projects or commercial development, how important is that? Do you see that in the field, and how well does that resonate out on projects?
Well, there's a gentleman that passed away here just a couple of years ago. He's kind of was referred to as the godfather of compaction. His name was Chuck Deal. He worked for Bomag Americas. And I've got a quote in several of my presentations that I do, and it says that compaction is the most important factor that will ultimately affect the long-term life of an asphalt pavement. More than the binder, more than the gradation, more than the voids, more than anything. It's the compaction. So compaction is the number one thing that we got to look at when we're seeing these pavements go down. And the major producers in the state have, they went from, Mike and I, I've been around a long time in this industry for over 40 years in this industry. And I can remember that back with the producers, they didn't have quality control labs. They didn't have their own technicians, but every producer now has a quality control lab and they have their own testers in place because they know the value of having that done, and they know what the value of making sure that the densities are there for the long-term life of the pavement. Mike, one of the things that you talk about all the time is the network. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the network, CDOT's network versus everybody else.
Well, when we look at CDOT is obviously the largest unique owner and entity, the largest network of paved lane miles in the state at about 24,000 centerline miles, but there are over 66,000 paved centerline miles across the state. So CDOT is only responsible for a small portion of them. The rest of that is on the backs of the cities and counties. It's about 72% of all the asphalt on the in the highway system. So that's a heavy lift. And so implementing best practices and moving forward for new construction and rehabilitation is key. Tom, you've got a video. Let's cue that up and watch that. And so just last year, the Federal Highway Administration, in concert with NCAT, put together a little 8-minute video about the importance of compaction and how the performance of our mixes in construction are heavily rely on compaction. It's a great takeaway. Let's take a look at that.
The backbone of America's economy is its vast roadway system. Our roads connect people and goods from one end of the country to the other, and asphalt is key to facilitating that connectivity. More than 18 billion tons of asphalt pavement are in place on American roads. Asphalt offers a high-performing, strong, smooth, durable roadway surface for the traveling public. Long-lasting, durable asphalt pavements are the result of collaborative partnerships between researchers, manufacturers, paving contractors, and agencies. These groups work together to engineer and develop optimal pavement and mix designs, materials, and equipment to improve asphalt durability and performance. In addition, they engage in research and collaboration about best construction practices and techniques to enhance asphalt's performance. When striving to make asphalt pavements more durable, research and lessons learned show density is an important factor.
There's a very direct relationship. The higher we go in density, the lower we go in permeability, which keeps water and air out of the pavement structure to prevent moisture damage from a stripping standpoint, to reduce oxidation of the binder that we've coated the aggregate with. From a stability standpoint, any mix is stronger to a point the higher density we achieve in place.
The Federal Highway Administration directed an initiative to examine the impact of improved density on the durability of asphalt pavements. The study leveraged the collaboration between state DOTs, industry partners, and the National Center for Asphalt Technology at Auburn University.
We're actually working on that now, working on some projects around the country where we try to work with contractors to reach higher density levels, and so that we can follow those projects and see what the impact in performance is.
And we have found through studies that if we get about 1% more density, we can add 10% more longevity in the field. So we can add a lot of years just by getting proper density in the field.
Achieving proper density starts long before the paving equipment reaches the construction site.
So density is a construction issue, and it really starts at the plant. It starts with making the mix in the right way, with loading the trucks the right way, so that you don't have segregation. The big rocks and the little rocks are all mixed together real well, and when they get to the paver, they come down in a nice uniform way.
There's some things we can do in a lab to predict that. That'll tell us this mix either consolidates too quickly, it's going to take a little bit more effort and time to achieve adequate compaction in the field. So a lot of that again comes with really knowing your materials.
Once the asphalt reaches the paving site, it's important the contractor follow best construction practices. From properly applying a tack coat to correct asphalt placement to appropriate roller operation, each step works toward the goal of providing optimal pavement density.
And then it comes down to good paving practices and good compaction practices by the contractor to make sure that they are using a good rolling pattern, that they understand how many passes it takes with the rolling train that they have to reach the highest level of density they can.
There's a strong relationship between the cooling temperature of the mat and your ability to densify the mat. So there's a range of temperatures behind the paver where you can go in and aggressively do breakdown rolling and achieve a big bump in density behind the screed. And then as the mat cools, you'll come in potentially with some intermediate rollers like pneumatic rubber tire rollers and knead the mat as it cools, and then you come back with a finished roller and take the marks out of the pavement. And you get an increase in density with all three stages of compaction. But the biggest opportunity to increase density is with breakdown rolling right behind the paver.
Across the asphalt industry, new technologies help contractors deliver a high-performing product and ensure agencies make good use of taxpayer dollars. One tool to help monitor asphalt mat temperature is infrared scanning technology.
That really gives us an opportunity. We know temperature is that critical factor in getting density. So if we monitor the temperature at the back of the paver, we know what the product is that's hitting the road. We know how closely we need to keep those rollers, where they need to stay to ensure that we get a long life product.
There are also innovations that help improve roller operation and provide real-time data to the operator.
Intelligent compaction has been a good add to our construction industry. We understand where we've traveled, where we've been, and where we need to go. So it is another important tool for our contractors to have in their arsenal to obviously achieve what we're all after.
A survey of asphalt mix producers found that more than 99% of the asphalt pavement material removed from roads and parking lots in 2017 was put back to productive use in new pavements. But how does the use of reclaimed and recycled materials affect the density of roadway pavements?
So the use of recycled materials really doesn't impact density. When we put recycled materials into an asphalt mixture, the mix can become a little bit stiffer, but there are technologies such as recycling agents and using softer binders allow contractors and agencies to still get great compaction on a mix with recycled materials, which will lead to better performance and better durability.
As the asphalt industry moves forward, partnership and clear communication among agencies across the country, as well as between those agencies and contractors, are imperative.
I think it's really important that DOTs specify their target. So exactly what they're looking for, whether that's a percentage of the maximum theoretical density that's achievable or a percentage density of what can be achieved based on the roller pattern that's established through the test section. You want to make sure there's no lack of clarity for your contractors, as well as the inspectors that are out there on site. So that's one really important thing to write into and make clear in your specifications.
Increasing asphalt durability and longevity benefits everyone: contractors, agencies, and the driving public.
So agencies and contractors can work together to implement ways to increase density, which will increase our pavement performance and allow us to get more life out of the mix.
For more information about asphalt best practices and emerging technologies, visit the Federal Highway Administration's website.
It's interesting to think that compaction and the way we're going about compaction right now is innovative. It's been around a long, long time, but what's innovative about it is the objective study that's being done right now to show how that increase in compaction translates into extended surface life. But getting back to the concept of innovation and what is our industry doing to move forward, your slide hits the nail on the head here. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Let's talk a bit briefly about what's new, what's the new frontier on our industry and innovative as it relates to mixes.
Okay, well, let's talk about where we are. We can go back, 20, 25, 30 years, and we can talk about Marshall mix designs, which we have, for the most part, moved away from. We're still seeing some of that out there. We moved into SuperPave mix designs back in the mid-'80s through the Sharps research. Well, when SuperPave started and SuperPave mix designs came into existence, it was never meant to be, well, we've got this new mix design and we're just going to live with it. It was meant to be updated and changed. There was supposed to be a Sharps 2 and a Sharps 3 and a Sharps 4. Well, we finally have come into Sharps research, the Strategic Highway Research Program, and we're now into what we would call Sharps 2, which is balanced mix design. So, why do we need to have a new mix design? Well, one of the things that happened from Marshall to SuperPave was there was a lot of rutting in the Marshall designs, and we came into SuperPave and said, okay, we got to solve this, but we can't ignore the cracking. And that's why we went to a design that would eliminate the rutting and try to eliminate the cracking, and that's through the PG binders. So we went to a new approach on the binders. It will resist high temperatures for rutting. It will work down in low temperatures to resist cracking. Well, the cracking that we see on a lot of these roads is not from low temperature cracking. A lot of the cracking is occurring because the mixes are so brittle. We've over compacted to take away the rutting, and we've made the mixes brittle. It's like peanut brittle. It looks great in a sheet pan, but if you hit it with a hammer, it breaks. Well, the same thing on a roadway. We put them down and they look great. Then we put traffic on and we start hitting them with that hammer and we start breaking them up. So we had to look at it, and the volumetrics, moving from the old methods to the volumetric methods, was a great step in the right direction. However, we are now have moved into that new direction where we need to be thinking about everything. So, like I said, the problems that we had, the rutting and the cracking. Well, now we're going to look at balanced mix design and move into the second phase of SuperPave, or a longer extension of what we've done with SuperPave. Now we're going to start addressing, okay, we know we've solved the rutting issues. We don't see rutting in roadways anymore. We might see ruts in a roadway that have come from a trench that has failed or something like that, but the asphalt itself rutting out, we don't see that anymore. But we do see cracking. We see early cracking. We see a lot of that early cracking. So now we have to look and say, okay, how do we adjust our mixes to eliminate that cracking, that early cracking, and the performance through that cracking? So, there's a lot of things that have gone out there, and there's been a lot of distresses that have been looked at. So, the question that we ask, and I have to give some credit here. You can see at the bottom of my slide here, this is Shane Buchanan. Shane works for the Old Castle Companies, which is now CRH. And they did a bunch of research, and they got a lot of information out there. And you can see that the cracking is from longitudinal cracking down to top-down cracking, and what percentage people think was their problems in their cracking. So those are the things that we have to be looking at, and we have to be aware of. Mike, I know that you in your years as a pavement designer, those are things that you would look at in a pavement design. And how would you adjust as a pavement designer to eliminate some of this cracking? What would you do?
Well, the answer is simple. There is to increase durability and addressing
premature cracking is to get more oil into the mix and maintain its flexibility.
And by putting more oil into the mix, we start pushing it back to that rutting side. So, you know, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't, right? We hear agencies all the time talking about our mixes are so dry, they're so dry, they're so dry. They're dry because of what we did in the early parts of SuperPave to eliminate the rutting. And we've gotten mixes that are very durable. They don't rut, they just crack. So there was some research done in the last 5 years that was out there, and it talks about, you know, what are the DOTs doing? What are the DOTs doing across the country? And they're to adjust their mixes so that we can start eliminating more of this cracking, but we still don't get into the problems with the rutting. So you can see what different agencies are doing. They've grade bumped, meaning it should be a 6422 binder, PG 64 minus 22, and they grade bump it to a PG minus 5828. A PG 58 minus 28. So they're grade bumping it to try and get a softer binder in there so that it won't crack. Some have lowered the design levels. They're no longer doing 125, they go to 100, or they go from 100 to 75. And we know of on the Ohio Turnpike, they are building at 65 gyrations on the Ohio Turnpike right now. They're using 65 gyration levels. There's a lot of other things that you can see in here of this chart. We've got 16 different items where people have adjusted their mixes. But you can see the last bullet point here is, you know, talking about establishing a true point. Cause and effect is impossible if we have no idea what's being done. Well, we adjusted this and we adjusted that and we did this and we did that. Well, it doesn't look anything like what the original intent of SuperPave looked like. Now it's some version that we don't know of. And when we were putting this together, I commented to Mike, what I should really have put over here where this text is out here is I should have put a picture of a couple of supermodels, a male supermodel and a female supermodel, and then over to the side put two zombies, because we started out and this is what we want everything to look like, these two models over here, but really what we've got is these two zombies because we don't know what they are.
Well, I think your takeaway here, Tom, is that the takeaway for me is when I see all of these DOTs across the country, including CDOT, this is their response to what they thought they needed to do to address premature cracking and also maintain rutting resistance. So you can see it's a very inconsistent message from DOTs. They all thought they were addressing it through different introductions of new specifications, and they become competing interests at the DOT level for material quality construction. So that's where I think as the industry has had to step back in, take 5 steps back and say, wait a minute, we need to design a new methodology for designing mixes that eliminates this inconsistency from DOT to DOT. That kind of was the basis in the beginning of a balanced mix design.
So we talked about testing. You know, we've been doing Hamburg wheel test or rut testing for years to eliminate the cracking, and we've done that. We have eliminated the cracking. We don't see cracking anymore, so we don't have to worry about that. So here in we have the balanced mix design is where we're going, and you can see on this chart we have 5 states that are fully implemented. We have 5 states that are actually working on balanced mix design, and then California has partially implemented, meaning they've taken some of it, they're still working on some of it. But the question is, you know, where are we going? The path forward is balanced mix design. You can see from my slide here, you know, this is the plan. We're over here and we want to get to the finish line. The reality is we're going to have all these bumps and dips and things that are in our way, and we found that out through our balanced mix design work group. Like I said, we have CDOT, we have lots of local agencies, but the big partner that we have in our balanced mix design work group is NCAT. We were able to secure NCAT to be part of what we're doing here in Colorado. So we're going to continue to keep moving forward, and we are going to move on to balanced mix design, and hopefully.
Thanks, Tom. As we move forward with one of the missions here at CAPA and technology transfer, we look forward to helping implement new technologies across the state one of them being this balanced mix design concept of and improving and enhancing high quality asphalt mixtures for use across the state. So stay tuned. CAPA is in front of this working with NCAD and as they're publishing the research. And we have developed a work group that includes CDOT and local agency representation. So more news to come to follow on that front. Now, the second piece of what we'd like to talk about today is the high quality asphalts. We all know that the sustainable funding is the key metric in order to make these programs successful. So last week, I had a similar discussion with at the MEGPEG conference, the Metropolitan Government Pavement Engineers Council, and with a good friend of mine, Mr. Scott Sonart. And Scott is a pavement engineer. And Scott and I have known and worked together for 25 plus years, and he is now the pavement engineering discipline lead for Kimley Horn. And it's extremely relevant information for your local agencies and information you can take back to what we're expecting to see for the 2021 construction season as far as sustainable funding for programs. With that, welcome, Scott.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Good to work with you again.
Pretty good. So today we've been tasked with talking about asset prioritization and the challenges that have been presented with COVID and impacts to local agencies and projected revenue shortfalls. So before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your history as a pavement engineer and how you've worked your way through pavement engineering and specifically deal with program asset management for local agencies.
It's interesting, Mike. I've been doing this my entire career, including working early in the career with yourself and others that we regularly work with. And it was out in the field, boots on the ground, walking 500-foot sections and measuring cracks, and really fell in love with pavements and how we can improve them and provide perpetual pavements to really extend life and extend service life. And then that morphed into working with more cities and counties and agencies across the country that focused on different types of materials and binder types and really learning forensics. What is going on with a pavement, how to do the right correction to bring it back to a good service life and extend the life remaining with different maintenance techniques, and also to learn the new maintenance techniques that are out there that are good for increasing the preservation of pavements.
Well, Scott, you and I both have a long history with MEGPEG going back to its early days in 1994. Tell me a little bit about your involvement in MEGPEG in its early formation, what it looked like, and what your involvement was with helping develop some specs, etc.
As a young engineer, Mike, it was fascinating how MEGPEG came across, and you and I both know some of the principal players that helped navigate that at a couple companies ago where we used to work, and I thought it was fascinating that the basis was, there's 23 or whatever agencies there was back then, and they all seem to have different pavement recommendations and thickness requirements and design requirements, and they were all a little bit different. And a few brilliant minds got together and decided, if we could come up with one standard approach, that would certainly make things a little bit more consistent, not only from a design perspective, but also from a construction perspective. And I feel, just in being in the background really and watching MEGPEG now, 27 years old, 26 years old, whatever it is, really being a success and being a strong voice for the Denver metro area at least and beyond. And it's been a wonderful collaboration of great minds in the pavement industry in Colorado.
Well, you can see on the slide here, here's a current snapshot of what MEGPEG looks like, and it's the core 16 local agency members that are represented with the city icons there, and their jurisdictions highlighted in pink that I put together this map. And what's interesting, and when you look at the footprint in the Denver metro area alone, the MEGPEG agencies are responsible for maintaining over 7,000 centerline miles that are represented within the DRCOG footprint. And that's over 80% of the mileage that DRCOG, or the Denver Regional Area Council of Governments, is responsible for maintaining. So MEGPEG has a very strong and unified voice when it comes to designing, constructing, and then most importantly, maintaining that network. And just a couple of years ago, MEGPEG led the way and issued a TAM guide, or a Transportation Asset Management Guide, to help not only the MEGPEG members, but all the other agencies up and down the Front Range to manage and prioritize their assets. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on a little bit today. One of the things before we talk about—
Mike, as well, sorry to interrupt you, is an interesting sidebar with that, with the company I currently work for. They were referencing mostly DOT and other specs, but over the last couple of years, just at our urging, they're referencing MEGPEG specs now because of the different nuances in there, and it certainly is an important voice, like I said, for developing pavement recommendations across the city and the state.
That's an interesting perspective. People ask us here at CAPA all the time about the use of DOT specs on private, commercial, or local agency works. And my co-worker here, Tom Clayton, his favorite response to that is, how many local roads does CDOT build? The answer is 0. And how many highways do our local agencies build? The answer is to 0. So why are we using highway specifications for local agencies, hence MEGPEG? One of the things that we do here at CAPA to help get an accurate assessment of how our local agency partners are doing is I developed this pavement condition report on an annual basis, and we just published it last week. It's available for free download on the CAPA website. And I like to show the success of this document. When we started it back in 2015, we had 27 local agencies responded. We're up to 95 agencies that are represented for cities and counties across the state. Those 95 agencies are representing over 62,000 lane miles, asphalt lane miles across the state, or 92% of the entire asphalt network across the state. So this becomes a very powerful document, and it's an accurate assessment of how agencies are funding and the current condition of their network. Here's just a quick snapshot of what's contained in the document. Most of you are aware of what we have here, but it's alphabetical, and it shows the agencies, the last time they responded with their data, how large their network is, and what their budget looks like for the upcoming year. So this is the 2021 data, and the two takeaways here, Scott, are the numbers in purple. That's $1 per lane mile, so that allows agencies to compare themselves, a direct comparison against other agencies, and then the PCI data, or general condition ranking, of what their pavement conditions look like. How important are those two metrics when you're trying to develop or manage a program for a local agency? What can you do with that data?
Well, Mike, as a pavement engineer, as you know, we like to see a lot of green in your PCI column there, and it also gives you a measurement of what the and I'm sure you're going to report, maybe talk some metrics a little further in our discussion here about what the average statewide lane mile cost is, and so you can use that as a little bit of a measurement to see how you're doing against others and also against the statewide average. You know, there's going to be a variety of different things, and the statewide average maybe is not the target where we want to be at as a statewide average. That may be low, particularly for 2020 with the conditions that we went through. So it's really important to be able to have that data and to be able to all be on the same page and all have the same goal of hitting that correct sweet spot PCI.
So let's talk about getting that data for just a minute. I get calls from our local agency partners quite regularly about either some, how can we have CAPA provide some technical support or some help on how to collect this data? How important is it as a asset management manager is the level of technology? What's more important, the level of technology or the commitment to the program to have a successful program, or are they equally important in your view? What does it take to develop a successful program?
Really, knowledge of pavements, I think, is step number one. Step number two is there's a variety of different methodologies, little software, a lot of different software packages, a lot of ways of collecting the data. But as a now gray-haired senior pavement engineer, I really still like to preach the boots on the ground methodology. As you know, learning about distress types and understanding the difference between block cracking and fatigue cracking, or shoving versus rutting, two examples of which there's extreme differences in how you would mitigate those. either a mill and overlay or full depth reconstruction, big cost differences. So it's really what I like to do when I get out in front of agencies or even some private clients is just teach them about what you're looking at visually and then what you can do with that based off of some either destructive or non-destructive data that we may find underneath the pavement surface. So it's really important to be able to understand where that sweet spot is and what type of applied maintenance is going to best be used to have a longer serviceability of your roadway and network.
I agree with you. And I think having a champion within your industry is probably paramount to the success of the program. Somebody that believes in a program like this and is a staunch supporter of it. The level of technology is what I share with our partners when they ask. The level of technology is not critical to the success or failure of your program. You and I have both done it where we've been boots on the ground with a clipboard and a wheel, measuring cracks, and we've also seen
PK nails.
Exactly. We've also seen the very high-tech level, automated data collection vans with their lasers and LiDAR systems, etc. That also exists out there, and that's what CDOT uses right now. But as we talked about the difference between CDOT and local agencies, the level of technology does not dictate the level of success of your program. It's more important about the commitment to the program and having a champion within your system to move forward. The last thing I think I'll share about the conditions and what we're looking at the takeaways from that document is it also gives us at CAPA a feel for what the size of the industry is going to look like this year. So for 2021, the 95 agencies that responded are looking at or programming over $312 million for those are basically their annual mill and overlay programs and their preventative crack seal, chip and slurry seal programs. On top of that, they're also budgeting close to $400 million on their capital works projects, their widening projects, etc. This does not include bridge work, culverts, etc. These are just paving, widening programs. So when you put those packages together, you're looking at over $680 million of local agency work in 2021. That's a big number. And then when you couple that with almost $285 million that CDOT is going to be spending on their rural resurfacing program, the asphalt program, just agency-wide, is approaching $1 billion for 2021. That's a big number when you start to put it into perspective like that, Scott.
What I like about this, Mike, too, is 2/3 of $1 billion. That's a pretty healthy market. I like the balanced approaches too, as well. Obviously, it'd be nice if you had a pretty high maintenance budget and the maintenance was effective for long-term strategy and maintaining pavements. But we all know that there is a non-infinite life of a pavement, and capital projects exist. But being able to see nearly 50-50 cut between your maintenance dollars and your capital projects, to me, says that the program is working for sure. And just to be able to share some of these data and maybe help others, on how to implement some of those strategies is an awesome way to proceed.
That's a great way to
and
look
I really
at the difference. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was asking you, Mike, about, hopefully we see other measures here, coming up regarding the ballot initiatives. I think you're going to talk about that the next slide. But let's get some more past some of these measures and be able to put some of the tax dollars to work.
Sustainable funding is the biggest issue when we talk about pavement management and asset prioritization. You and I have been doing this for a long, long time, and all the clients and agencies that we've ever interacted with, every one of them will tell you if it's not their top priority, it's one of their top 3 priorities, is developing a sustainable funding program. The rest of this is not rocket science. It's cracking, mitigation, monitoring, engineering, developing a program. But without a sustainable funding source, revenue, these engineering programs, they just don't work. And so one of the things we do here at CAPA is support our agency partners in their ballot initiatives and moving forward with this work. And so we like to share some of the successes. So back in November, there were 2 local agencies that were successful on their ballot initiatives. And the reason we share this is because it has direct impact on maintaining a sustainable funding stream. Adams County for example, passed their issue 1B, and that eliminated the sunset that was due to sunset in 2024. So they're out in front of it a little bit, but it's a half-cent sales tax dedicated to street improvement programs. The nice thing about the Adams County ballot measure was half of the 50% of those funds stayed within the county, and then the other 50% of the funds were distributed to the local agencies within the county. So Westminster was going to see a bump, or they were going to continue to see that funding. Commerce City, City of Aurora, etc. So it's a win-win-win for everybody there. And then Greeley also saw success with a renewal of a food tax that is specifically dedicated for their infrastructure program. So the last thing I'll share when we talk about ballot initiatives here is if your local agency is exploring any of these opportunities, don't be afraid to give us a call here at CAPA because we have all kinds of technical resources and financial support for citizens groups to help pass these issues if they come up. But bigger issue here, Scott, is there's no way around the success of a program if it doesn't have sustainable funding, correct?
Absolutely. You got to have the funding, and hats off to the people that push the ballots for Adams County and Greeley.
So COVID, let's talk about this. And now let's talk about asset prioritization. Early on in the summer, there was a survey that was put together from the state. CAPA participated, CCA, Colorado Contractors Association upstairs, put together a survey. And they, what we've got highlighted here in red in the middle is the takeaway, the different impacts from cities and counties. And we were showing potentially in the midsummer, we were going to see they're forecasting 30 to 50% revenue gaps for 2021. It wasn't that bad, and I'll share some data about that in a minute. But Scott, talk a little bit about why is there a significant difference in impacts from cities and counties? Why are the counties showing their impact wasn't as bad for their road and bridge program versus cities and their street programs? Why aren't they the same?
Well, if you understand where the funding comes from, a lot of tax revenue, right? Cities are relying upon a lot of retail. Retail obviously was down. This survey was taken in the heart of COVID, and I'm sure there's been some improvements as things started to open up a little bit, but very difficult when you're dealing with retail or theaters or golf or anything outdoor activities that cities typically rely on versus counties where they're looking at property taxes for their revenue. And so a little bit more robust there, not as affected by COVID-19. But I feel like this is a waiting and happening, and 2021 should be on everybody's radar as just that comeback year. And I know we're all going to get through COVID here, hopefully shortly. But what a boon we're going to have with people who've been holed up for the last several months are just able to get out and spend their dollars and start adding back to the coffers of these, particularly of these cities and counties that need roads repaired and capital dollars improved.
So at the time, again, this is April and May, so it was early on last year. But the last chart down there on the bottom, we've got a couple of things highlighted in red. These were agencies. You can see the cities and counties and municipalities, and what their projected response was going to be. How were they going to address potential revenue gaps for 2021 because of COVID impacts. You can see the number one response for both counties and municipalities were they were going to delay capital projects. Then they were going to reduce some operating expenses, trimming the fat, etc. And then as relates to our industry was also delay equipment purchases. So those were going to be the primary responses to addressing revenue gaps. And so talk a little bit, Scott, about why and how important it was that maintenance isn't on this list and why that's a good thing, that they weren't prioritizing delaying maintenance. They were prioritizing delaying capital projects that hadn't been let or that weren't under contract yet, but they really weren't addressing their maintenance needs because they recognize how important those are.
Well, I think that, Mike, sums up asset prioritization. Where do you need to catch a roadway in its service life in order to sustain its life, its long-term life? And that's in the middle, early stages to the middle of its life. And so what we're seeing here is obviously an impact or an effort to sustain roadways by applying maintenance and in the correct ways, using thin overlays or different preservation techniques that may be important in keeping that pavement from so-called falling off the cliff or the curve and into that expensive reconstruction territory. There's a lot of different products out there, and there's a lot of different paving techniques that we've really have been impacted since the advent of SuperPave technology, for one, back in the late 90s, that are really able to sustain pavements a lot more than we used to. So hats off to all those that the agencies that are really putting their dollars into the crack seals and seal coats and other preservation techniques that are keeping pavements a lot more sustainable.
Here's a great example of what you were just talking about, Scott. This is just a couple of agencies. I just kind of handpicked a couple of agencies to show this is 2021 data for what their approved budgets look like this year. And you can see some of the positive growths. Denver, where they're putting an additional $100 million in through their Elevate Bond program. Douglas County saw a bump in their budget. El Paso County is good. Some of the other ones that are showing a decrease, but we have to be careful here because Moffett County, way up in the northwest Colorado, up there by Craig, is a great example. Their county commissioners asked the all departments to take an 8% reduction in their overall budget, but their road and bridge department got a bump. They got a $540,000 bump, which is significant for Moffett County. So while their overall county budget was down, the road and bridge budget actually went up by $500,000 because they recognized the need and importance for their roadway prioritization. I think the last slide that we talk about here is revenue that we look like. I'm able to compare agency to agency and year to year and get a direct comparison. And this year I had 27 agencies that responded to our 2021 survey and our 2020 that I could do a direct head-to-head comparison. And so when we look at these 27 agencies, 13 of them said their budgets were going down this year, 58, basically 50%. 14 of those agencies said they were either going to maintain or increase their budget for 2021. So when I mentioned earlier that earlier fallout from the survey that said maybe we're going to see 30 to 50% reduction in agencies, it didn't turn out that bad. So if you look at a net gain, the agencies that are going down versus the offset of the agencies that are going up, it's a net gain for these agencies by about $2.5 million. Basically, out of that $320 million, it's a neutral thing, but it's great. We're not seeing agency funding going like this. We're seeing it go like this. That's good news for everybody.
Absolutely, Mike, and especially with the all-important trend that we all know is around. Haven't seen the 2020 data yet, but population increase. I mean, Colorado is just in such a huge area of growth. I read somewhere that the Western Slope is about to, I mean, they've already boomed, but they're about to boom again. And we all know what's going on with Castle Rock and everything north of Denver, and just the tremendous growth in population. And like I said earlier, I think you're going to see in the next year or two just a significant population increase, and everybody wants to come to Colorado, which is great. But to be able to, at least, even with the huge year that happened in 2019, followed by 2020, and all the issues of 2020, to see a budgeted increase is positive growth. I mean, it's not the rate we'd like to see, of course, with all things considered, but I take this away as a huge positive for our state.
I agree. It's the sky is not falling, and with some proper
That's right.
management, we can get through this without some serious negative impacts. Talk to me for a minute about that overall. When you look at the performance of an agency, and they tell you their overall PCI score, how heavy of a lift is it to get to raise that PCI score versus how easy it is for that PCI score to backslide and to try to dig yourself out of that hole? There are two different levels of effort to maintain or to raise or to lower.
A good example of that, Mike, and I won't list any agency names, but just being able to get with them on a particular year, let's say like 4 years ago, and we initiate the discussion of, hey, we need to implement a pavement management program. We need to be able to get a good handle on what our overall PCI is. We looked at it in 2013, for example, and now in 2017, we feel like we're falling off a cliff a little bit. What can you do to help us? And so we'll provide them with some education like we talked about earlier. And oftentimes that won't get implemented for the next, year or two. And at that point, it's becoming more critical, and that those easy maintenance dollars are now becoming heavier rehabilitation or reconstruction. So the time to act is now, and we often use the phrase of, you don't want to implement 2010 pavement management applications. It's changed, and there's like I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of ways to maintain a pavement, but hopefully being able to catch that number at something that's manageable for you to be able to implement with the budgets that are tight, a little bit tighter right now, obviously we're talking about, but still to be able to have that where you're just to a point where you've got to get rid of some roads off your roadway because they're just beyond salvage and you don't have the funding to be able to do capital projects to improve them. So I feel like we're in a great state in Colorado where we've got a lot of progressive thinkers and a lot of agencies that do have funding, and they just need to be able to implement that strategy and be able to talk to folks like us and CAPA and others who have that mentality. And I hats off to all those folks that do.
So our roadways that are out there that are requiring major rehabilitation, meaning they're in the poor category, fair and below, that would require, some in-place recycling, FDR, things like that. Those are budget killer type projects. And so we know that using some recycling techniques from a design perspective, program management can really help stretch the budget on those projects. But let's talk about the projects above that on the curve that are in the minor rehabilitation category. And let's talk about thin overlays right now and the success of what those can do for a local agency. And we say it's new technology, but it really isn't new. NCAT's been studying the performance of thin lift overlays. They put the first one down for Mississippi DOT at the test track in 2003. So we've got almost 2 decades of performance criteria on thin lays. What is your definition as a pavement engineer, Scott? What's your definition? What do you use when you think of thickness wise of a thin lay?
I love thin overlays or thin lays. And you mentioned Mississippi. I was going to jump in and say the Deep South, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, huge into thin overlays. Their DOTs have implemented that ultra thin overlays, which, ½ inch, even 3/4 of an inch. The pushback we get on those, and I'm a huge fan because you can almost use a thin overlay as a preventative maintenance technique, a little more pricier, but when you're getting 8 to 10 years out of a thin overlay versus 2 to 4 out of a seal coat, and you're paying 1.5 to 1.75 times the cost, well, you can do the math. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think that the challenge is there's still that overlay mentality that, oh, it's a rehabilitation, it's going to cost me this much, and why am I going to a thin overlay when I might as well just go to the thick overlay? Well, you're using a little bit less material. That thin overlay is acting as a real robust sealer and a nice riding course. The other mentality I think that we need to continue to educate is with some of our contractors and being able to find the right aggregates and the right mixes. Personally, I've designed some thin overlay mixes, and they tend to work very well. They're very durable. Sometimes they're hard to test because you think you need to test in terms of density and some of the other measurements that we measure traditional overlays with, we may not apply to a thin overlay. So I love where you're thinking, Mike, and I'm hopeful that we can help lead that charge and maybe even get more methodologies out there on how to design and implement a good thin overlay here in Colorado.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our discussion here today, Scott, is leave a couple of takeaways for our agency partners. The picture isn't as gloom as we thought. Developing a sustainable funding program is critical, and consultants and CAPA have some resources out there and available. And then the final takeaway are what are some of the actual tools that you can use, and the thin lay overlays, that half an inch to inch range. It's really, that sweet spot is about 3/4 of an inch. It's a finer blended material, but debunking and getting past some of those preconceived notions about it being rough, susceptible, etc. They've shown in 20 years of performance that those thin overlays can be excellent tools to maintain your roadway here. So with that, Scott, I want to thank you for joining us here at the MEGPEG Annual Conference and sharing your expertise as a pavement manager and asset prioritization. Any final thoughts or takeaways?
No, and thank you, Mike. It's great to be with you and to be with this wonderful organization that I've been really a part of for the last 26, 27 years. We live in a great state, a growth-oriented state. And keep in mind, I do a lot of national stuff too. We've got some of the best aggregates and binders around. And so be able to take advantage of that with asphalt pavements is just something that we need to continue to strive for. Thank you again.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Tom and Mike, thank you so much for speaking about balanced mixture design with the next step in high quality asphalt paving mixtures. That was a wonderful high level look at the process from concept to implementation. And thank you for also touching base and talking about local agency funding concerns, asset and program management, and MEGPEG as well. MEGPEG's a wonderful collaboration of our local agency members. And we look forward to continued progress on balanced mixture design in Colorado. So with that, we received a couple of chat questions. The first one is more of a statement, and Tom Clayton was kind enough to answer it, but I'm going to have Tom answer it on behalf of the people who are going to be looking at this session virtually in future. The first comment or statement was from John Wanigman. He is with Arapahoe County, and John Wanigman says, I think producers are currently incentivized or required to reduce AC content in their mix designs to compete with competition based on AC mix top costs. He also goes on to say that balanced mix designs hopefully will address this condition.
Yeah, and I did answer back. My first reply to that was, first, John, congratulations on your move to Arapahoe County. He bailed on Wanda over there at Greenwood Village and moved down the street about 4 blocks to Arapahoe County. But your comment is not off base, John. The balanced mix design concept will address those issues. We had swung so far. We were so concerned early in SuperPave about the rutting that we swung so far to that side to get rid of the rutting through the rock-on-rock contact and making sure we had enough crushed aggregates and all that kind of stuff in the mixture. And now we're swinging back to where there's new testing coming out, and what Colorado's going to adopt is called the ideal CT or the ideal crack test. So mixes will have to meet the minimum crack test criteria, and they'll have to meet the minimum rut test criteria. So their mixes are going to have to be balanced to meet both of those things in order to work. So what that's going to do is it's going to hurt some DOTs it won't affect at all. But the way it's going to hurt the DOTs is the mix design will be submitted and it's going to be approved, and that will not give the designer or the DOT, whether it be a local or a state DOT, any leeway to adjust that mix. Right now we have DOTs that will say, well, I want you to add this, or I want you to do that, I want you to do this. Balanced mix design is going to take that away, because the mix design is balanced to work to resist the cracking and to resist the rutting. So it's going to be one of those things where there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, and it's probably going to be more of a learning curve for the state DOT than it is for the local agencies. Most local agencies don't mess with mixes too much, but the state DOT does.
Thank you, Tom. And one thing that we'd like to point out is I do miss working with John, and one little chat message that he sent back to us was Greenwood Village is in Arapahoe County, so we're still part of the same team. So our second comment or question is from John Federico, and John is from Pueblo West Metro District. And his question is, what type of information is out there on thin overlays?
Mike?
So we've got some technical resources here at CAPA. We've got some recorded webinars in our CAPA video library that are available that we've talked about before. There are some special considerations when we talk about thin lays. It requires a different mix type, thinner, smaller aggregate particles. And then also from inspection and acceptance criteria on the back end, we don't use traditional procedures to monitor that or to test that. So several resources. If you have individual questions, you can call Tom or I. We're happy to visit with us or take a look through the CAPA library. But or to piggyback on that, if that's something your agency is interested in, CAPA could also come down and do a lunch and learn. But it's a great new tool, but it does require some special considerations.
And piggyback on Mike's talking about the CAPA library. We do webinars at CAPA. We partner with the APWA on doing webinars. They're one of our great partners, so that they're available to everybody that's on this call today, anybody that is part of APWA or CARS, the county group similar to APWA. And those are on the CAPA website under the RMAEC, the Rocky Mountain Asphalt Education Center. And you hover over that on the menu bar on our website, and then there will be a link up there that says archived webinars. And there's 2 years worth of archived webinars that are sitting up there that have been recorded, and they're available for anybody to go up and get. Again, through our partnership with APWA and others, we have all those available.
Right, and the website for CAPA is www.co-asphalt.com. Is that correct?
There it is.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a great resource of information for people who are new to the industry and people who are experienced with the industry too. You know, it's just such a great place for you to touch base on and refresh your memory on, you know, all the things under the sun related.
One other comment that I saw in the chat window, Wanda, from Dave Roush, you mentioned, you know, not to forget about ADA compliance. You know, that's one of the things that really cuts into budgets. And I know, Wanda, you deal with that a lot. And there's those other things that are out there. When you go onto a street and you're doing any work on a street above a certain level, you have to then bring it all up to ADA compliant standards. So some things you don't have to do anything ADA wise, some things you do. So when you're talking about budget cutting, ADA is costly to when you're ripping out concrete and taking out curb heads and putting in new ADA ramps and all the things that you're required to do for ADA compliance, which really cuts into project budgets. Let's be honest, you know, you're taking money off the street and you're putting it into the curb, or you're taking it off the street and you're putting it into a signal light, because you have to now have the ADA compliant signal lights with the beepers and the tones and those kind of things. So it's just important that we understand that we're not only talking about, when we're talking about road improvement dollars, it's from back of curb to back of curb.
That's correct. That's correct. And of course, regardless of funding requirements or regardless of funding that's available, ADA compliance is not negotiable. That's something that we never cut out because of budget. I mean, that's the one thing that we always have to focus on and make sure that we push through and make those ADA compliant upgrades, and making sure that our curb ramps are compliant and other items in ahead of a pavement management project are addressed. So it's just one of those things that we have to keep an eye on with our budgets. And if it means that we have to take away from paving one street and we have to defer that pavement maintenance for the next year, or, you know, later on in the season or later on in the service life of that pavement, but that's just the way it is. It's a very good point to bring up. I think that is our last chat message. Let me just check, just double check. Yep. All right. So Tom and Mike, thank you again for your time today. We definitely appreciate it. And Pamela has informed me of the winners of the gift cards. And we actually have 3 gift cards instead of 2, as I previously mentioned. The first one goes out, it's from Colorado Barricade, And John Federico from Pueblo West Metro District, he won one of the gift cards. So John, Pamela Weimer is going to be emailing you with connecting you to the sponsor who donated that gift card, and then you can let them know whether you want to have that as an electronic or a hard copy gift card. Our second gift card is again provided by Colorado Barricade, and the winner is Philip the Hill from City of Brighton. Congratulations, Philip. And our third gift card is provided from Color Repaving, and the person who won is Sarah Constantine from Jefferson County. So again, congratulations, John, Philip, and Sarah. Again, you're going to receive an email from Pamela Weimer, and she'll send that out to you shortly. So we'd like to wrap up our conference for today, and thank you again to our sponsors, the American Concrete Pavement Association, the Colorado Wyoming chapter of ACPA, the Colorado Barricade Company. We have Colorado Ready Mix Concrete Association and Color Repaving. We'd also like to thank Pamela Weimer, the APWA Colorado Chapter Administrator. She managed the conference registration and also organized the conference to help make these virtual sessions a success. And thank you to you, the attendees, for participating today. Couldn't do this without you. And I just want to give you a reminder that our third and final virtual session on championing construction with COVID-19 impacts, it's scheduled for next Thursday, February 11th, 2021 at 11:30 a.m. And again, we will be posting today's session to our website since we recorded the session. And until then, be well and take care.
Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Wanda.
You're welcome.